Distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, good evening. I am delighted to be here today to address you for the 7th Hamad bin Khalifa Symposium on Islamic Art. Next year, the VCU campus in Qatar will be celebrating 20 years of its existence. Establishing it in 1998 represented a bold decision by our country's leadership to build a branch campus of one of the finest art schools in the world. Now, President Rao will no doubt claim that it's the #1 art school in the world, and we're delighted to host you. VCUQ has produced new generations of young artists and designers who have enriched my country with creativity and innovation. It has made my job easier by empowering young creatives to not only produce art, but to participate in designing its exhibitions and presenting it to our different audiences. The fact of the matter is, VCUQ is also Qatar Foundation's first branch campus, which testifies to the creative affinity and ambitions of Arabs and Muslims. It also reflects the progress that our traditional nation has made. Initially, the campus was an all-girls school, but over the years, it was transformed into a co-ed institution. Its graduates are increasingly pursuing careers in the arts by joining the Qatar Museums as well as other cultural institutions in my country and worldwide. In fact, some of the most promising people working in the creative industries are graduates of VCUQ. So, Mr. President and all the faculty and administrators involved in these partnerships, congratulations. The subject of my discussion today is contemporary Islamic art. I have been asked to define the meaning and value in contemporary Islamic art. I would like to share my perspective, not that of a scholar, but that of a patron of the arts in my region, to shed some light on the cultural activity taking place in Qatar, but also a perspective that takes into account the challenges we face in our region today. Contemporary Islamic art derives much of its power from its ability to give voice to a large section of the world population by being contemporary in form and Islamic in character. Some of its practitioners draw their inspiration from the past, referencing great Islamic civilizations through contemporary narratives. Other artists choose to address their culture by using contemporary art idioms not pertinent to any specific region or artistic practice, but relevant to their experiences and expressing their worldview. The very idea of contemporary Islamic art can be, and frequently is, debatable. Art produced today is nothing if not global, as many artists and art critics would argue. So what makes art both part of the Islamic canon and part of this global interconnected super-regional world? 7 years ago, in my TED Talk, I addressed the idea of the local and global, illustrating how the two terms have become complementary in our world. Similarly, contemporary art produced in Islamic countries or by artists who are Muslim is at once global, participating in the artistic dialogue across all country boundaries and recognizably Islamic, as it embodies and is inspired by our distinct culture and religious identity. This synthesis of the old and the new in art, of tradition and modernity, is what drives the vision of Qatar Museums' art programming forward. The exchange of ideas, histories, artistic identities, and investments in cross-cultural dialogue is important to us. We invite artists from all over the world to visit Doha, present their work, and engage with artists, both young and those that are more established. In the last few years, we have hosted artists like Damien Hirst, Chaiko Kwan, Sarah, Takashi Murakami, Luke Twymans, and others. We have equally been active in showcasing artists whose work may be considered to be contemporary Islamic, such as Shireen Nishat, Mona Hattoum, Wael Shawki, Diya Al-Zawi, and many more. Some of the artists from the Arab world whose works we display may take issue with the concept of contemporary Islamic art. Diya Al-Zawi comes to mind since his work references modern and ancient history and the culture of his native Iraq. But his work is not in dialogue with specifically Islamic concepts. He is engaging in a political conversation, no different from any Western artist today. Others too may question their engagement with religious topics. Nonetheless, the artistic productions in our part of the world is on the whole inextricably linked to and informed by Islamic culture and identity, which fuel work even by those artists whose main ideas and concepts seem far removed from any religious themes. What is the value of the concept of contemporary Islamic art? Beyond its art historical classification or beyond the typological, it is important that there is such a thing because it's a way of facilitating dialogue across cultures and artistic traditions between countries and individuals. Visual expressions is a form of culture integration. Our contemporary artistic production represents the thoughts and ideas of our people. It represents a view of the world and its critique from our perspective. That perspective needs to be shared to enter a dialogue with Western art and with art from our regions of the world. 10 years after the establishment of VCUQ, the Museum of Islamic Art, known as MIA, was built. It is where we hosted you during the last Hamad bin Khalifa Symposium. Designed by I.M. Pei, a Chinese-American architect, the museum represents a very contemporary form of Islamic architecture and houses one of the most exclusive collections of Islamic art in the region, if not, if I may say, the world. MIA is more than a museum. It is and will remain a symbol of our community and our youth. It is a beacon of diversity, richness, and innovation that mark our Islamic civilization as it was and as it should continue to be so. The museum, both physically and programmatically, is a platform for dialogue and exchange between scholars, artists, and the general public. It is a catalyst that encourages countries in the region to think about art and culture and embrace the differences of the human race through cultural exchange. It also exemplifies a progressive vision of investing in culture the same way our investment in education has enabled our country to be fertile ground for creativity and innovation. The museum showcases and supports various themes in Islamic art: calligraphy, poetry, geometry, and floral motifs. We also address misconceptions such as the presumed lack of figurative representation in Islamic art. Through our collections, we exhibit such figurative representations, thus allowing people to understand the richness and plurality of Islamic artistic expression through the centuries, and subsequently, that there is not only one form of Islam. Some people are more conservative, while others are more liberal. And how they accept different forms of art very much depends on their outlook and understanding of what art should be. The museum also works closely with educators to train and empower them to teach not only about art as an aesthetic category, but about the socio-political and economic context of artworks. It is important to understand why these works were produced and to what end, just as it is important to understand the historical production of Islamic art. One has to understand the contemporary representation of Islamic art today. Consider, why is a museum in Doha called the Museum of Islamic Art, yet the Islamic wing of the Metropolitan Museum in New York is called Galleries for the Art and Arab Lands, Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and later South Asia? It is important to think of the context. The Met is situated in the city of New York. Its audiences are diverse, and it introduces a region that many may not be aware of in terms of its history, culture, richness, and geographical spread. To emphasize the numerous lands over which it extends allow for a sense of the great reach of this region's culture. In fact, as a Muslim Arab living in New York, I am very proud of what the Metropolitan Museum has done to their Islamic art wing. It's very educational and informative to their audiences. While in Doha, situated in an Arab country in a region with a Muslim majority, the emphasis on the common Islamic faith serves to emphasize a sense of identity for the people of the region. Following the opening of the Museum of Islamic Art in 2010, we opened Metaḥaf, an Arab museum of modern art. This building was once a school, and we converted it with the help of Jean-François Baudin into the museum it is today. The culture institution sits within Education City and offers an Arab perspective on modern and contemporary art. This museum is not just dedicated to gathering examples of Arab artistic expression, but is also a center for conceptualizing local artistic and culture practices. Through its curatorial mission, Metaḥaf has shaped new framework for contemporary Islamic art. 6 years ago, the Su'al of Qatari Art Between Memory and Modernity exhibition, which featured Only Qatari artists and works produced between the 1960s and early 2000s embedded local art in a broader artistic discourse. Metaḥaf became an instigator and catalyst for young generations of local artists who, through exposure to the masters of modern art, built upon their narratives and through engagement with these artistic lineages have forged their own identities. The Museum of Islamic Art and Metaḥaf Arab Museum of Modern Art both create a nexus for contemporary artists working in contemporary idiom and/or reconnecting with their past. But it's also important to mention other institutions that have invested in offering support to such artists. For example, we have renovated an old fire station designed by a local architect, Ibrahim Al-Jada, and it's converted into a space that now supports many artists living in Qatar. As a matter of fact, we have many VCUQ faculty who end up with studios at our artists in residence. And every year, 20 artists benefit from the fire station. Two that come to mind are two VCU graduates, Uthman Al-Khunji, a Bahraini artist whose work addresses the topic of Islam, and Aisha Suwaidi, a Qatari artist who look at local traditions and refashions them in modern material and form. Qatar, our hugely popular culture village, embraces music, food, dance, theater, and poetry through its endless activities. The Qatar Philharmonic Orchestra bridges East and West, attracting members from across our society. All these culture entities once embraced our Islamic civilization and continue to do so, but in modern form. The Doha Film Institute have also supported filmmakers from our region and have taken them globally through multiple international awards. Rem Kool House's Qatar National Library, a part of Qatar Foundation, will open its doors this spring, making literature and science books accessible to all. The Private Engineering Office continued to build and restore historical buildings, respecting our architectural tradition, and one of their most famous projects is the Hamad bin Abdul Wahab Mosque, which is our new state mosque. In 2018, as we celebrate 10 years of the Museum of Islamic Art, and we'll be opening the new National Museum of Qatar, designed by our French architect Jean Nouvel, this is another example of a museum that, like today's topic, past, present, future, will embrace our country's history, presence, and future ambition. In one visit, those entering the museum will be able to understand our history, our present, and our future goals through a multidisciplinary approach. It is a living museum, and its narratives will be constantly updated depending on the events that take place around us. Now, one cannot ignore what's happening in our region today. So, for example, the political blockade imposed on us by our neighbors will now be included in this narrative. It is an important part of our present life, and with time, it will be part of our history. During the holiest month for all Muslims, our air and land borders were closed. Why did our brothers in the region impose such a blockade? Now, this is not a Damien Hirst installation. This is an animal left to die in the borders over the summer. Until now, no one really understands the real reason for this behavior, and the aggressors have still resisted any form of dialogue. The current crisis in the Gulf thus frames any conversation about contemporary culture, and by extension, arts in the region. The unfounded accusation, the funding of terror has been directed at what was, in fact, one of the most liberal nations in the Gulf. Qatar Foundation doesn't only host VCUQ, but is home to a variety of other branch campuses. Georgetown, Texas A&M, Weill Cornell Medical School, Northwestern University, Carnegie Mellon, UCL, and HEC. How can a country that has invested so much embracing the values of liberal Western education and principles of freedom by bringing these schools and making them accessible to its citizens and residents, be said to condone or support terrorists and their actions, which it entirely abhors and condemns? As a consequence, the blockade has further ignited our artists to communicate visually. The energy they propel is infectious, and here are some examples. Dialogue and diversity has always been a key component to Qatar's identity. Ours is a country made of diverse populations. Over 100 different nationalities live in Qatar. In such a place where many cultures intersect and people cohabit peacefully and in harmony, the value of cultivating an open mind is paramount. Similarly, in the international arena, we have always engaged in conversation with the world. And even when our views differed from others, we addressed such differences in a respectful and dignified manner. This approach is evident in everything that we do, including our activities related to contemporary art. We have invited large numbers of artists to engage with our communities and societies. We have commissioned these groups to produce works of art, literature, and engage in scientific activity. We have absorbed and encouraged the spread of ideas that we have embraced as part of a contemporary life in our country. Al Jazeera, for example, is not only the first free press in our region, but also one of the rare regional media outlets that promotes contemporary art and artists from the Muslim world, like Munir Fatmi. All around Doha, you can encounter sculptures of some of the world's most famous and cutting-edge artists, as well as sculptures by local and regional artists. We believe that art is a language that transcends linguistic and cultural differences. Sometimes when an artwork was introduced into the public sphere, some sections of the community who were unused to such things initially reacted in less than a positive fashion, the bear being an example. But after a while, dialogue and discussion started to take place, and the wider public began to truly appreciate these artworks. Some sculptures that may have been bewildering initially have since become a beloved symbol of our city. Since the Earthfisher bear has been installed at the Hamad International Airport, it's become a favorite spot for taking selfies, and through the dissemination of these images through social media, it has become a recognizable symbol of Doha around the world. So if you pass by, you better take a selfie. Calligraphy murals by the French-Tunisian artist El Cid adorn one of the motorway tunnels in Doha. He used our national anthem lyrics and poetry in his calligraphy in one of the most popular undergrounds. When some critics state that we are importing Western culture, I ask them, didn't Islamic art influence some of the greatest masters of the West? Wasn't Matisse, Picasso, and Klee as examples influenced by the productions of Islamic art? Don't Western museums own some of the best collections provided from our Islamic civilizations? If you want to learn about Babylon, you have to go to Berlin. And if you want to retrace Palmyra, you need Paris. So what is Islamic art? How about Islamic architecture and the Arabic language? The story is never one-sided. Artistic creations moved with economic centers, and past works from one culture and civilization may influence an artist of another history. As a Muslim artist, you do not have to carry the weight of art history on your shoulders, which gives us, the freedom to create in whichever narrative we choose to. If their inspiration lies in their past, so be it. If they choose to embrace new narratives, so be it. That's their choice and liberty. But to come back to our initial question, is contemporary Islamic art only defined by the identity of the artist? What about the artworks that are created in dialogue with Islamic tradition? Richard Serra's Seven is created in the artist's recognizable minimalistic artistic idiom, but is also inspired by the shape of the minaret and is intended to be understood as a visual marker within the skyline of our city. Very much in the same way that I Am Pace project from the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha was similarly rooted in a dialogue between the past and the present, redefining the language of Islamic architecture for the new age. And Jean Nouvel's National Museum of Qatar, like his Institut du Monde Arabe in Paris, is a structure that draws an inspiration from Islamic lands and cultures, creating a distinctly innovative synthesis and artistic expression. All these examples show that Islamic art is not left in the past. It is neither stranded in the distorted mirror of the Orientalist art, nor is it ossified in the beautiful medieval objects. It is alive, ever-changing, constantly evolving, and redefining itself. It is a vigorous artistic expression that participates in global dialogue while preserving its heritage and traditions and inspiring future generations. It is an expression of freedom and a vehicle of dialogue and exchange. Contemporary Islamic art surpasses all prejudices and borders. It brought us all together today for the 7th Hamad bin Khalifa Symposium on Islamic art, a reflection of 14 years of close collaboration between Doha and Richmond to exchange ideas and research on this topic. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our co-chairs, Sheila and Jonathan, and thank you for giving me the honor to open this conference. I am thrilled to be here and very much looking forward to an inspiring few days of discussion between some incredible speakers and experts. I trust that you will find the event educative, informative, and enjoyable. In dialogue, we shall engage. Thank you very much.